So we've been asked to do it in English. I hope everything, it's going to be okay with everybody.
So it's Mitchum and TV, and actually this is an idea of Gianluca's. And we said, okay, why not? But we don't have any special ideas about Mitchum and TV, except that Philippe has seen a lot of Mitchum on TV and done a little bit of it too. So maybe we should start with things. There are a lot of cliches about Mitchum, and the idea, I think Gianluca's idea, as ours was, not to dispel those cliches, which is meaningless, but simply to ignore them and to do something else. That is, to do Mitchum as an actor, and Mitchum as an actor in a time that interests us as film goers, as film viewers, as film researchers, historians, whatever. And so we chose, the rules of the game here is 8 films, 1 week, and so we chose 8 films between 47, his first great year, and 73, 74, which seems to us that a time after which Mitchum simply didn't care anymore. And so looking at this thing that I took that is pasted over there in the hall, and that I'll paste again when we come out, I'm seeing another chosen filmography with another 8 films. I think there are 3 of the same. Of course, you have Pursued, which we didn't choose because it was to us a bit too obvious a film, too voluntary, too deliberately an ambitious film, and we thought Blood of the Moon was more interesting because it said more or less the same things, but within the framework of a genre film, which Pursued was attempting to blow up or to come out of the past, of course, was here. Angel Face is another, is a film by Otto Preminger and Howard Hughes. So Night of the Hunter was out because it's been shown several times, I think, at the Cinema Ritrovato, and I'm sure you all seen it. One of our regrets is Thunder Road by Arthur Ripley, which is in this filmography, and we couldn't find a print. It's very simple. 2 or 3 of Mitchum's most personal films are very difficult to get hold of, and this one, Thunder Road, do you want to say a few words about it?
About Thunder Road? Well, yeah, I mean, it's actually the one that I think is really missing at this festival, because we tried to get movies in which actually he was committed to the part or committed to the project. And of course, this is the only of his films which he wrote. He wrote the song for it and he produced. So, and he was kind of maybe not in subject, but in milieu, which was what you call that, alcohol running in the Appalachian Mountains and stuff. It's a milieu that he actually was attracted to. He always were attracted to the criminal, as he said, the criminal mind. So I just want to say something about the experience of meeting Mitchum and also having to interview him. I did both. I did it professionally, if you can call it that, for French television in '82, something like this. And I also met him at a party. He was drunk both times, but various degrees, and also his behavior was completely different. It was really black and white. The party was really something that I always remember, because I was invited completely not even by chance. I think it was a mistake. I mean, I was really Peter Sellers in Blake Edwards' movie, really. There was absolutely no reason for me to be there. It was kind of intimate. It was for the launching of the Santa Barbara Film Festival. So it was very sort of like old school Hollywood. There was there was Emily Williams, there was Robert Blake, and Mitchum was already in his cups a little bit when he came in, and he spotted Judith Anderson. She was sitting there with, eating a little thing on the sofa, and he knelt in front. He went to her and he knelt in front of her, put his face on her lap. And said "mother," because if you remember, she played his mother in Pursuit. And I tried to corner him on some subjects and stuff like that, and he was very, let's say, unruly. He gave me the fisheye and just cut me short completely. Now, for the TV interview, he was also drunk, but a completely different way. We caught him at the tail end of a junket for a TV series called The Winds of War. And it started at 10 in the morning, and we caught him at 5:30 or 6. And he was already, maybe 15 vodka tonic or something, But he was very amenable. I said, well, I would like to ask you 2 questions before we get to the Winds of War. And he said, why do we have to talk about the Winds of War? He didn't give a damn, So we did ask him about Night of the Hunter, and we asked him about
Lusty Man by Nicholas Ray.
The Lusty Man. And he was very, very helpful and seemed interested in stuff. But of course, the most interesting thing was when we wrapped up, and because he kept on talking. That was the thing about Mitchum. You didn't really ask questions. You didn't try to guide or anything like this, because if you did that, he stopped. So because he talked like a jazz singer. He liked the sounds of certain words, and he had a set of greatest hits. Some of them were there was his little adventure on the chain gang when he was a teenager. There was Charles Lawton. There was how he pissed on David Selznick's rug. There was the stories like that, but he never told it the same way, in a way, because truth, there was always a grain of truth in what he was saying, but if he liked the sound of something, he would just run with it, which, of course, gave us those wonderful stories that have been taken up by his biographers, without checking or anything like that, But so after he talked about Lawton and Nick Ray, he also talked about meeting Ben Bella in Paris, and being with the Algerian Liberation Front or whatever. All kind of tall tales like that. Being in Africa during some revolution, going to Vietnam to check out what was going on there, And it went on and on for about an hour, and I said, well, so you're really interested in revolution? And he looked at me and he says, no, not at all. He would never let him being sucked into an intellectual question or ideological question or whatever. He liked stories. He liked to tell stories. He was very Irish that way, And this is why, all the anecdotes, all the quotes even, are very entertaining, and they will always remain, even if they're, not necessarily true. Because they're just marvelous. So we selected, let's go back a little bit about Mitchum and TV in a way. Since, this is the title of this thing. There was not really anything particularly special about Mitchum and his attitude towards public performances. He actually was... he was not a recluse. He was not, he would be game for just about anything, really. Even from the beginning. He even participated. He was a mystery guest of a TV, an old-time TV shows from the 50s called What's My Line? And the participants are supposed to guess who's the surprise guest, and they don't see him, so they have to to ask questions. You know, are you vegetable or are you whatever? But when Mitchum came, and that was like in the late 50s, when Mitchum came, there was such a raucous in the audience and stuff like that you know, the participants were kind of surprised, and the first question was, are you a musician or are you a rock and roll singer? Because it was really like, you know, Elvis Presley had come into the house or something. That was at the time when he was just starting in RKO and stuff, and he had a fan club, you know, the Bobby Soxer, you know, okay. And so he was very, very popular. And, you know, he lent himself to the game and stuff like that. So it was not like, he's never been a bad customer for interviews, you know. So I think maybe we should have the first excerpts. So if you want to see a lot of interviews with Mitchum, you know, they're all on YouTube because he was a good customer, you know. So those are entertaining, you know. But for instance, like you know, the Dick Cavett show, which is a very famous one, you know. But basically, he just reacted to Cavett. You know, Cavett was good enough and spiritual enough to actually make a big deal about his being scared of him and stuff, you know. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I know that when I started my TV interview with him, I went to the loo and I threw up first, you know, and then I went out there, you know, because he was very, even though he was not threatening or anything like that, he was very imposing, you know. He was actually. So maybe we should have this one. I picked this one because, or we picked this one because it's one of the very few of his public appearances where he actually was completely serious. He was not doing some kind of show business thing, and he tried to actually answer the questions and stuff. And also because it was still a period where he was really handsome and didn't have those damn glasses that he wore later on. So we picked this one.
And myself too much.
Vous avez débuté par des westerns et vous continuez d'en jouer souvent. Est-ce le genre de rôle que vous préférez?
Well, I enjoy westerns because they're very simple. I started off in the Hopalong Cassidys, you know, and I used to, I got $100 a week and all the horse manure I could carry home. And it was playing cowboys and Indians out in the fresh air, free lunch, you know, and it was better than working. I discovered that. And they're very, you know, singularly uncomplicated. Sometimes they're physically demanding and occasionally physically hazardous because, I mean, after all, you know, falling off horses and jumping from trains to horses and back again and so forth sometimes can be a little uncomfortable. But yeah, I think I like it. I mean, it's uncomplicated. And as I say, it's a good outdoor exercise. I enjoy that.
Pour beaucoup de gens, vous êtes le symbole du mauvais garçon, du dur de cinéma. Et cela depuis 30 ans, sans que l'âge n'y change rien. Qu'en pensez-vous?
Well, truly, I think that sort of came about probably largely because just of my own personality, just, you know, my own attitude. And secondly, I came on at a time when sort of the ugly leading man, you know, you didn't have to be particularly pretty, and I had a heavy bass baritone voice, so they just manufactured a heavily masculine image, which was not necessarily true. But I don't know, it becomes a stock and trade, I guess.
Vous avez travaillé avec beaucoup de metteurs en scène célèbres, Edward Metrick, Vicente Minelli, Howard Hawks, Henry Hathaway, Otto Preminger, Joseph Losey, et enfin David Lean pour La fille de Ryan. Parmi eux, qui vous a le plus impressionné et peut-être le plus influencé?
That's very difficult to say. I think probably the person who most impressed me was, I mean, this is apart from individual personalities. I think the person who impressed me most was Charles Laughton, oddly. And I can't Charles Laughton and who was almost a complete actor's director. He was excellent. And from the others, or of the others, we didn't have a great deal of exchange because I came with my little satchel all ready to go to work, and I did it, and they might say, well, a little more to the left or a little more to the right, or louder or softer or something like that. But I don't recall long sessions with a director, really, ever.
Just
Je vais le prendre à l'oreille. C'est qui l'intervieweur? On ne sait pas. Ouais, ouais.
Vous avez commencé par écrire des poèmes pour enfants, et l'on dit que vous en écrivez encore. Est-ce vrai?
No. The children grew up, and they got a little too hip for me. I write verbally, principally, now. I mean, I was a fiction writer, and now I just tell lies, about myself.
Parmi tous vos films, beaucoup pensent que l'un des meilleurs, voire le meilleur, c'est Deux sur la balançoire, que vous avez tourné avec Shirley MacLaine. Est-ce votre avis?
This one we didn't pick out. Two on the Seesaw is not one of our choices. And neither do I think it's many people's choice. Anyway, so okay. Well, as a parenthesis, nothing to do with TV, but it's interesting about directors, the idea that directors are people who give you your marks. This is what Robert Parrish told me, Mitchum told him about Nicholas Ray. You may, if you've read it, I'm sorry. I apologize in advance, but anyway, Parrish, as you may know, replaced Nicholas Ray for a couple of days on the set of Lusty Men, and asked Mitchum how Ray was directing him. And Mitchum said he's not very good with marks. Why? Well, because usually when directors tell me how I should play, how I should act, etc., I look at my marks, so I'm not going to miss them. But in the case of Ray, he would give me great introductory speeches, and then he would say, and also improvise. And so I didn't have a chance to look at my marks. So, and Parrish commented that, of course, it was a Mitchum story. It was typical of Mitchum's humor. And that, of course, Mitchum was one of the most serious and one of the most serious working actors he'd ever worked with, which is something that you will see in most statements by directors about Mitchum. You have, if you look at the Todd McCarthy's book about Hawks, you find Hawks telling Mitchum after a couple of days' work, you're a biggest fraud I ever met. Mitchum said, why? He said, because you play as if you didn't care. You do as if you didn't care. You pretend you don't care at all. You pretend you're just going through the gesture, and actually you're one of the hardest working actors I've ever worked with. And Mitchum is supposed to have said, well, don't tell anybody. And you have the same thing in Houston. Houston saying that Mitchum not only is a great actor, but he's a great actor in the sense of Laurence Olivier, who was, of course, at the time the god of actors. And he could play King Lear, Houston writes in his memoirs. So you have this kind of respect by most directors, by most American directors, and the opposite. I'm going away. I'm improvising also. I'm going away from the subject television, but let's why not? After all, the only person I've met, well, you have the story by Aldrich, but Aldrich says I have great respect for Mitchum, but he doesn't have any respect for me. So the Angry Hills, Le Colline dell'Odio, was a very unhappy experience for Aldrich, but Mitchum just came along for the trip to go to Europe. But anyway, the only person I've heard spontaneously telling me about Mitchum was Andrei Konchalovsky. So as you know, Andrei Mikhalkov-Konchalovsky was a Soviet director who made a few films, a great first feature, and then a few spectaculars, and then got what he wanted, that was go to Hollywood. And his first film was still a very European, very Russian story. It was a story by a Russian writer. He had Nastasia Kinski. He had a very good American writer, a very good American actor, but I forget his name, but who looked exactly like one of the best Russian actors, Vasily Shukshin. And he was telling us, Pascal Aubier and me, he was telling us about the experience of working with these actors, how wonderful it was to work in Hollywood and things were easier and blah, 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 so on and so forth, how it was wonderful to work in America or in the States. And he said, well, of course, I had a very bad actor playing the father. That was Robert Mitchum. Of course, we both jumped and said, what? He's one of our favorite actors, etc. And it was very difficult to get him. He said, yes, well, he's wonderful to talk at night. We would talk. He would tell stories until 3 in the morning. But as an actor, he never did anything I wanted. And of course, it was interesting but in the first place, he never understood what we meant. And I more or less understood that had to do with the difference between the American actor, the so-called natural actor. I know that's a cliche, but maybe there's some truth in it. And the European and especially Russian way of thinking about the art of drama, the idea that an actor would prepare in a certain way, probably Stanislavski, not Stanislavski American way, but Stanislavski Russian, and would be a completely conscious actor and do everything. And Mitchum did not give this idea, did not give this front to his directors. Or maybe it was by that time, or maybe it was basically a European director would have had a hard time understanding Mitchum. Okay, that was the end of parenthesis.
Yeah, another thing I would like to go back to is actually the quality of his story spinnings. You know, I mean, he was like. It would need launching a little bit, you know, but if you actually let him go, I mean, the thing is, you know, when I got my, for the French television, I thought we had the great interview and this and that and stuff, and, you know, like 3 months later, I saw something in the LA, some kind of, I think it was the LA Weekly or something like that. He was telling exactly the same stories, you know, he's just spinning them a little different, you know. He was very Irish that way, you know, and he needed that. He needed the sound of it, and in the better recorded interviews, you see that. I mean, if the interviewer is smart enough to let him run with it, you know, because if you actually try to direct the questions and stuff like that, he would just stop dead like a horse, and that was it. And after that, you don't get anything from him, you know. But and the thing is, you know, he as I said, he spinned the things, and we found out later that it was actually he was, you know, telling you about another movie while he was telling you about the Nick Ray movie or something, you know. I mean, he was just like, but the stories sound so marvelous that you didn't mind really that much, you know. I mean, it's just the music, you know. So, he was really not, I mean, like I recently met someone, a French friend of mine, who actually was a photographer on a later interview, and It was for le journal. It was published in the Journal du Dimanche, but only a little bit of it. She said that he received them in his office on Sunset Boulevard, and he was already pretty much in his cups. Kept drinking vodka tonics all through, and he talked to them until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So, I mean, they ran out of tape. The interviewer was telling the photographer, take notes. Of course, she was drunk because, I mean, even if she drank one for 5 to Mitchum, she was completely blind, by the time it was over, But what I mean is that he actually liked to talk, I mean, if you got him in a good mood, I mean, he would just keep spinning them, those great stories, This is why you find all these stories, which are usually, I mean, even if they've been proved completely wrong, you find them in all the biographies and stuff like that because they're just too marvelous for words. So I mean, we go with it. So I think we should keep on. We still have a little bit of that same interview, and then we'll run the cinema thing on Lawton because he really admired the guy, even though he was also hell on wheels, even with Lawton, whom he loved. I mean, you can imagine if he didn't like somebody, he actually loved Lawton, but I mean, he misbehaved quite a bit on the Night of the Hunter, which, of course, every time he speaks on Night of the Hunter, he never mentions that. He never mentions that he was partying all night and coming in the morning, really the worse for wear, and sometime even not being able to, I mean, you couldn't really shoot him because he looked so bad, So, but when he talks about Lawson, it's like with love always. I mean.
That impression upon them, upon the producers, for a year, and they insisted. I said, "Why don't you get, Greg Peck or get someone whom I would consider to be more suited to the part than I." And they insisted that I do it, and I did do it, and I'm very glad that I did because I had the experience of working with Miss McLean, who was a fabulous performer, and I enjoyed it. But I'm still of the opinion that someone else could have been more effective than I in it.
Vous avez eu pour partenaire à peu près toutes les actrices célèbres. Laquelle a votre préférence?
Oh, that's an indecent question. You don't ask that.
La fille de Ryan semble être votre premier personnage de vaincu. Le pensez-vous? Et si oui, pourquoi l'avez-vous accepté?
Well, I accepted it because, first of all, it was an excellent script, and I was very flattered that I was chosen because it was a job that required a degree of professionalism. I mean, after all, the name is not Ryan's son-in-law, it's Ryan's daughter, so it required working actually toward the whole, the complete film. And if I should stop and do a vaudeville turn for myself in the middle of the film, if I should exploit myself, it would damage the film. And I was very pleased that I was considered to possess that degree of professionalism. Very flattered, really. That Mr. Bolt called me, as a matter of fact, from London when I was in California. I told him that I didn't want to go to work, and he said, well, why? He said, is it the protracted tenure of this project that you find off-putting? Because we found all sorts of places where you can be free, where you're entirely on your own. And I said, no, it's not that at all. And he said, well, then what? I said, well, I just planned suicide. I said, I beg you. I said, I plan to kill myself. No further questions, right? Oh, he said, I understand. He said, well, if you would do this film of ours and then do yourself in, he said, I'd be happy to stand the expense of your burial. I said, okay. I told you in front, I'll do it. He said, really? He said, may I tell David that? I said, you can tell the Queen. So I did it.
Vous avez dit plus ou moins que La fille de Ryan serait votre dernier film. Mais votre ami Paul Newman prétend qu'il ne faut pas s'inquiéter parce que vous passez votre temps, dit-il, à faire vos adieux au cinéma.
Yeah, like Schumann Hike. I don't know, really. I work as little as possible. Let's put it that way. You know, I think my family's getting bored with me being around the house, and I'll probably have to go back to work in order to just achieve peace. That's all. I'd rather not, but I may have to.
So, like, you had a prime example of how he spins. You know, there's always he's talking about. I mean, he's telling the truth, but he's like spinning stories and stuff. You know, and if he likes the sound of something, you know, he'll just gonna run with it.
Doing impersonations, accents, etc., which you're going to see also in the Charles Lawton bit.
Maybe we should have it. Circumstances of it, I just said it a little bit, and you know, he was like very. You know, he listened to the question. I mean, he was really good about it, like, you know, but and he didn't mind at all that we didn't talk about the whole career or whatever, as long as, you know, we kept on one subject and then give him his head, you know, like let him run with it. So I think we should let him run with it.
Initiate the Night of the Hunter, or how did you get Night of the Hunter? Did you initiate the project, or was it offered to you?
Charles Lawton.
Charles Lawton.
Yeah.
Did you know the book before? Or? Mm-hmm. Yes. Did you know that there was the man who wrote David Croft?
Yes.
What could you tell us a little bit about it?
What about him? Charles Lawton sent me the book. And I read it, and he said, "You must know," he said, "this is a desperate, unconditional shit." I said, "Present." He said, "Well, I'm not, you know." He said, "I'm making my living reading the Bible." Like I said, "I'm here, Charles. We'll do it." And we did it. And he wrote the screenplay.
Did you help out with it?
No, I wouldn't. No way. With Charles Lawton, no. No way would I attempt to. No. Charles Lawton is the best director I've ever worked with. He should have been doing that all the time.
Why didn't he do it?
He died.
Do you think it's an important picture for you? I mean,
Yes, I think so. Yes, I think so. Yes, because as much as he tried to, you know, minimize the horror of it, it was still there. Because he put on the little owls and all that shit, you know. Nevertheless, it was still there. I wanted to do it right down the fucking line, you know. And he said no because the women would take their children off the streets, you know. He didn't want me to be that horrible, you know. And I wanted to be just that horrible. But he wouldn't allow it. He said, no, I don't want you to be that horrible. We you know, we loved each other. And I'm sorry, actually, that it's the only film that he ever directed, because he was brilliant. He was the best director, I think, I've ever encountered.
You've just heard, you know, him spinning a little. I mean, handling the truth. Let's say, because when he said, you know, like he died. Well, that's a good TV that's a good TV moment, but the fact of the matter is that the producer of Night of the Hunter had bought the rights to Norman Mailer's The Naked and the Dead, and they were actually preparing this while shooting the film. So in fact, I mean, Lawton didn't just stop in his track because he died. You know, he just was totally devastated by the lack of success of Night of the Hunter, and so he walked on the Norman Mailer thing lackadaisically, and after that he just went back to what he liked to do, which was teaching acting. You know, but he didn't die. I mean, he died.
He died 10 years later.
10 years later. But that's Mitchum. You know, it's just like another one. Another one that of his stories that was kind of funny was about the Lusty Man. About the Lusty Man. He told us that the script was terrible and everything, and he wrote the script with Nick Ray in the bar and all that stuff. And he told us that he got a letter from the author, Tom Lee, and all that. It didn't make any sense because Tom Lee was actually the guy who wrote The Wonderful Country, which is a Western that you're going to see. I mean, I hope you're going to see tomorrow in a couple of days. Which is a wonderful book and also a wonderful movie. But Tom Lee certainly had nothing to do with The Lusty Man. But he just took a story and just ran with it, and it was so marvelous that you didn't care if it was talking about the wrong film or whatever. I mean, it was just it was a great story. So
and there's a postscriptum to that, because when I was writing the book about Nick Ray, I interviewed Parrish, and he made the same mistake. Of course, it was not Tom Lee, it was Claude Stanash. And he made the same mistake. He said Tom Lee, and he gave me Tom Lee's telephone number. I called Tom Lee, who of course told me I have nothing to do with Lusty Man. I never had anything to do with rodeo, etc. So I said sorry, and I hung up. And a lot of the stuff that Mitchum said was true in his fashion, that it was useful for me for research. When he said, okay, he sent us, we don't have a script, Tom Lee, so Claude Stanash, sent us a 10-page letter about rodeo, and we said, Chet will shoot the letter. It's not completely wrong. It's true that it's true that they rewrote the script during production. It's true that they were writing ahead of shooting, that a lot of writers were coming in, that there was an input from Mitchum. There was in some of his films. Some films he didn't care. Some films he just brought in a few lines or things like that, or a few ideas that way. And what else? He told the final story. That's a pity we didn't use that. The final story was about an ending written by the producer, Jerry Wald, which had Mitchum returning to an old flame of his called Rosemary. And Mitchum remembered the line, the actual line. I checked later in the various drafts of the script. What was it?
We'll see each other again. Rosemary.
Heal all wounds. Time
heals all wounds.
And his character was supposed to answer, and wounds all heals. See you later, Rosemary. And actually, this is a completely ridiculous final line. And it was actually in one of the drafts of the film, or in a draft of a scene. So a lot of stuff, he had an extraordinary memory. And the memory together with the ability to dramatize the telling of it. So that was actually this interview, together with a LA paper interview a few months later that you mentioned, were actually useful for me, because at the time, it was a combination of both things. At the time, I had access, or researchers had access to the archives of the studio of RKO, the studio which had produced Lusty Man. and I had access to the various drafts of the film, or to the non-draft, the first 2 acts, etc. And it was true that Horace McCoy had delivered only part of the script and then had a writer's block. It was true that there was a phony ending attached to it, etc. And his story, as fantastic as it was a good guideline to do research. So it's a little story not about Mitchum, but about what Mitchum could do with his storytelling.
Back to his interviews. This time it's not a TV interview, but I mean one of his most infamous interview. Well, actually, it was a feature on him in Rolling Stone at the time of the Friends of Eddie Coyle. Sorry. So it was shot in Boston, and the writer from Rolling Stone, name is Grover Lewis, was a visitor on the set and spent some time with him and stuff like that. And there was like 5 or 6 pages in the magazine, and it was basically Mitchum was very unguarded, and you know, as the Rolling Stone at the time was really, they were not pulling any punches. You know, there was no gentleman agreement. Protection, you know, the writer was really writing about what he was seeing and what he was hearing. So Mitchum, I mean, I happen to be a friend of Grover Lewis, so I know exactly what happened. And but Mitchum totally denied everything in block. I mean, like because it was the interview was kind of embarrassing for him, and I mean, at least for his wife, because there was a lot of about his peccadillos on the set and stuff like that. So he said, I never talked to the guy. I mean, I talked to him for 5 minutes. And of course, you know, he talked to him, you know, I have the cassettes. So, I mean, I know that he talked to him for at least 2 hours, if not more. And, but again, you know, he was totally unguarded during the interview, and he went back to this thing about writing, you know, because it's something that fascinates interviewers. His writing poems, and he also wrote plays, you know, and he goes at length into a particular play that he did when he was like in his, you know, late 20s, which was for maybe not. I mean, it was Eugene O'Neill was actually the guy who was reading the thing. And it nearly got produced and stuff like that. But when you talk to him about that, he got very reluctant, and it's just the same as when he answered very humorously about his writing. You know, he said instead of writing, he writes verbally, which I think is a very good definition of what he did. You know, and if you go on YouTube and stuff, and you can see that the pleasure of spinning stories, you know, which that's why he was never very hard to get an interview. I mean, like he gave interviews until the end of his life. I mean, he already had cancer and stuff. And he was on TCM with Jane Russell as a favor to Jane Russell because she was a good friend. But you know, he was like looking a little wound and stuff like that. But he never really said no, because I think he liked to talk, you know, unlike us.
All right. Thanks very much for your patience.